I'd like to introduce Martin at this time. Martin Tel is the C.F. Seabrook Director of Music at Princeton Theological Seminary, where he directs the seminary choirs, facilitates the music ministry for daily worship, and offers courses in the area of church music. Martin was also the senior editor for Psalms for All Seasons, which is the psalter that they will be using today, and I'll give you more information on that too if you want it at the end. So if you have your Psalms for All Seasons, you can see the blue hymnals on the tables there. Go ahead and take yours out as well, but if you don't, you'll be fine. I'm sure you can learn a lot from what they're teaching us in singing. But Martin was the editor for that, and he's also a good friend. Martin is married and has 3 children, lives in Princeton, New Jersey. And at this time, Martin, I'm going to ask you to turn your sound on, and I will turn it over to you.
All right, let's do a check first. Can you hear me, Diane?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Thank you.
We're off. Thank you, Diane. And Diane is a good friend, and I'm really glad to be able to do this. And I thank some of the students for showing up as well. We'll try and hold this to 30 or 40 minutes so that you do have questions. And the students are here, and they can ask questions. And all the students that are here today are part of a class, Psalms and Christian Worship. And the students are intrigued by your questions as well, because I know that you are all practicing pastors, musicians, worship leaders, and worship planners. And the questions that you ask are very insightful for our learning as well. So please do send them to Diane as we're going along. We sing psalms, and we go to the psalms for inspiration. And whether we know it or not, many of the hymns and praise songs that we incorporate in worship are psalms-based. But the students here, some of them are actually following the discipline of journaling, reading, praying, and singing through the entire psalms, 1 through 150. They will tell you that there are a lot of psalms we don't go to, and they are pretty obscure to us, psalms that we do not know and are not our go-to psalms. St. Ambrose referred to the Psalter as the gymnasium of the soul. And when it comes to the Psalter, I think we've closed off some parts of the gym, and we've turned the whole experience, I would say, more into a spa. We head right to the sauna or the massage table. And I understand that. I get it. As I've gotten older, and this is testimony time, there are aches and pains that I feel. And so recently I went to a physiatrist to deal with the most recent pains that I experienced in my legs and knees. And she suggested I do some yoga routine. And I have to explain that I've been dabbling with yoga, but it's not the yoga that she was talking about. I've been going sometimes with my wife to what is restorative yoga, and I think I'm getting into this class, yoga class, with a lot of people who are just jumping off the train Friday after a week of commuting to New York City, and we all just sit there with props, and we relax, and we hear like soothing music, and it's really quite wonderful. It's "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He restores my soul." These are the psalms that we go to. And this is not to minimize restorative yoga or restorative psalms, but what I got sent to as far as physical therapy was much more than just restoration, or at least a different sort of restoration. It's the strengthening of all those muscles that I've been ignoring. And that's what the Psalter can be for us. By strengthening all those other muscles, the idea is, and it's actually working, is that you're actually putting your body in a better structure, and it decreases the pain and the fatigue that you're feeling. So this is the metaphor I want to work with a little bit today. Preachers, you're preachers, pastors, you're musicians, worship leaders, you're worship planners, to see yourselves as, in this metaphor, personal trainers in prayer for worship through psalms introduced in worship. And so we may glance at a few of our spa psalms, our psalms of restoration, but our focus for this class will be particularly on some of those psalms that we might otherwise avoid. So here we go. We may choose some examples to sing, and for that reason I'm very glad to have some of my students here to cover up my voice. But maybe that way we'll have some examples that you can hear as well. Let's consider some of the ways that we can introduce our congregation to psalms. And maybe we could start with an easier entry psalm and look at Psalm 84. So if you look in Psalms for All Seasons, if you don't have it, you've got a Bible, you can at least kind of follow the psalm. Psalms for All Seasons, this will be on page 508. 508. So this is a psalm that we all know. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs and gives thanks for the courts of the Lord. And I can ask the people around me right here, what is your musical or feeling conception of this song? What are some adjectives that you might use?
Praise.
Praise.
Thanksgiving, rejoicing.
Thanksgiving, rejoicing.
Belonging.
Belonging. I would say musically, if you look at the settings that are in Psalms for All Seasons, if you look at choir anthems, if you look at the songs that we often sing to Psalm 84, many of them start out very gentle. How lovely is your dwelling place, or as the Old English and some of our older language, oh, how amiable are your dwellings, O Lord of hosts. And so sometimes a melody can help us to think of a psalm in a different way. And there's nothing wrong with thinking of the psalm more gently as the sparrows flying in and out of the psalm. But if you look at 84, letter D as in dog, you have a different experience. The power of this melody suggests to a congregation that the psalm might be experienced in another way. And let's sing one verse of this, and you'll get what I mean. Associated with memorial services, with funerals, the text for all the saints who from their labors rest. And the overlay of a pre-existing melody can actually be a way to introduce people to a psalm. That this psalm then becomes a song about triumph, about a place that you're looking forward to being, about heaven itself, about the New Jerusalem, about the temple of Christ. So you can use the power of a melody to suggest to a congregation how they might experience a psalm. Look at Psalm 140, letter A, and here's another example of a psalm that does this in a much different way. Psalm 140 is a lament psalm, and some of these psalms of lament have such vivid language of pain and agony, and that's why, in some ways, traditionally, these have been associated with passion as in suffering, or the passion of Christ, the suffering of Christ. And if you're looking for a way to hear another voice in the psalm, again, a melody can help you do that. Let's sing just the first verse.
Martin, I'm going to break in here a second. When you were playing the piano and singing, we were having a little difficulty with the sound. It was like too much sound coming at the webinar. I think the Zoom and I. Would you be able to just try singing without the piano once?
Yes, we're going to do that. That'd be great. I'm just going to get us going. And Diane, let us know if this doesn't work, but let's do one verse unaccompanied. Deliver me from evil, defend me, Lord, from wrong. The violent and with poison on their tongue, from those who plot to hurt me, or catch me in their snare. Protect me, Lord, and keep me safeguarded in your care. So what we have then, hopefully, Diane, if I don't hear from you, that all went just fine. But you identify the pain of the psalm with the pain of Christ. And what can also happen then is you identify Christ with, and by extension, the prayer of the psalmist with my pain. So it's a way of entering into what would otherwise be a very difficult psalm to enter into. Just the melody can do that. And then one more, just looking at melody, 40, letter B. And some of us in the class sang this a couple weeks ago. And we don't need to sing this, save a little bit of time, but I'll just sing a little bit of the very first line and you'll get what we're after here. I waited patiently for God. Just a nice, slow singing of that. Brings, in a way, a distraction of a melody and another text, right? So the previous song, I should just say, in case you didn't recognize it, was O Sacred Head Now Wounded, as kind of overriding that Psalm of Lament. Here's Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound, with this psalm about being lifted out of the miry clay, of God sinking down to where we are and lifting us up. And I'll just mention, many of us in the community here at Princeton Seminary today, there was a walkout at 10 o'clock to be in solidarity with those people in Parkland, Florida, who lost their lives a month ago. And as we slowly read those names, somebody suggested that we start humming. And this is what we started humming, Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound, just as a backdrop. And the power of humming or singing a melody on top of something that is very difficult or hard to understand can be a way to give meaning to something. I like to say it holds our hand as we go into a sort of dark place. I want to talk a little bit about refrains and the possibility of using a refrain or a chorus as a navigational tool. If you look at 41, Psalm 41, flip to the next one. 41, letter B as in boy. Here, you could use just as a refrain, what a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Psalm 41 is a psalm, a testimony of somebody who's been hurt. And a lot of times we avoid these psalms because we think the enemy language throws us off. We think it must be about a war that Israel must be having with somebody. No, a lot of these are about the problem within the community. And Psalm 41 is really one that helps us with that. If you look at verses 8, 9, and 10, or verse 9 especially, even my best friend whom I trusted, who broke bread with me, has violently turned against me. So the psalm is very kind of internal to the community. And we indeed have very few hymns that we sing in church that lament. And sometimes we don't even recognize them as laments because we sing them in a way glibly or with too much familiarity. And one of those songs, I think, is What a Friend We Have in Jesus. It's really a lament. And if you kind of slow it down, we've got the jazz saxophonist in the room, but you can sing it to the melody we all know of, what a friend we have in Jesus. You can turn it into blues, right? And this is a psalm that's really kind of the blues. So why don't we take, to hold our hands into this really dark and difficult psalm, text that people know already. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. I know that, I hope that there will be some questions that you have. I got a pre-question that Diane sent to me of one of you saying that in your tradition you would never use refrains or responsorial psalms, and particularly chanting. So I want to just address that a little bit and use this psalm as an example of how you might do that. members of this class and members of the seminary community, I would say by and large, we do not come from chanting traditions. A few of us do. We have Lutherans in our congregation, in our seminary community, who do chant the Psalms every week in worship. But so there are two things I want to emphasize. One is you don't need to chant these responsorial psalms. They work just fine being read. But I do want to kind of give an example of how you might chant a psalm. So if you have your Psalter there, you see that there are little red dots above the words in the text. And those correspond to the next page where you see a tone. And the tone here is a very simple melody that will work with the psalm. So you just stay on that first note until you see the red dot, and then you move. So the first verse would be, happy are they who regard the poor. The Lord will deliver them in time of trouble. Let's do verses. Let's sing the refrain, so you get a sense of the refrain, and then we'll chant 3 verses, and then we'll sing the second verse of the refrain. What a privilege, you know. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Happy are they who regard the poor. The Lord will deliver them in time of trouble. The Lord protects and revives them, those blessed in the land, and does not hand them over to the power of their enemies. The Lord sustains them on their sick bed, and ministers to them in their illness. Are we weak and heavy laden? Take it to the Lord in prayer. And we're doing this without accompaniment right now for the sake of the webinar. We might, but what you might do is you might just have that spoken, and you can have a guitar player or a piano player or vamping musicians just playing underneath the reading. One thing I've learned when we first started exploring using refrains with spoken verses is that it doesn't feel natural to let the music stop completely and have reading and then jump in with music. It feels like you're jump starting every time you sing. But if you have music going underneath, we might experience that with another song just a little bit. It just is enough connective tissue to help people just to come right back in with singing. Let's do one more verse, just for a sense of how might you do this. And I would advise, whatever instruments make most sense in your worship community, like guitar is fantastic with this chanting. And what you might do is look at the voices of the song. You get verses 1 through 3 that just makes a declaration about who God is. And then the testimony starts at verse 4, and it really goes all the way through verse 12. And then there's an addition of that 13th verse of doxology. So I think it really works, for the congregation to be the enliveners, the enablers of the testimony. So the congregation keeps singing, what a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. And there's some kind of wishes for God to take care of these people who are hurting me. And so that refrain could always be just what a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. The message then being, give it to God. Don't take vengeance into your own hands. But you could use these refrains. You can have a small ensemble sing verses 1 through 3 just to say this is declaration, and then have somebody step forward and either read or chant verses 4 through 12. And the congregation and the ensemble just keeps coming back with these encouraging words of, are we weak and heavy laden? Take it to the Lord in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Take it to the Lord in prayer. And I will just kind of read through 8, 9, and 10. A deadly thing, they say, has fastened on him, and he is taken to his bed and will never get up. And what you might do, if the testimony person stepping forward to sing this or say this is a woman, you can change that to her, has fastened upon her, is a testimony of somebody who is hurting, who is ill, and who's being scorned and spurned. Even my best friend, whom I trusted, who broke bread with me, has violently turned against me. But you, O Lord, be merciful to me and raise me up, and I shall repay them. But then what do we sing? Do your friends despise forsake you? Take it to the Lord in prayer. So that gives you some ideas of how those responsorial settings can work. Another way to frame these prayers for people so that they can understand them is to use prayer itself. We were looking at 41b. Look at 41a. And some members of the class, we experienced this as well. That is to say, to use the psalm as a framework for prayer. Psalm 41, 1 through 3 is read, and then we go into prayer. And when we did this with our Psalms practicum, with the people who are going through the entire Psalter, we had one of our students actually go where it says further details may be added as appropriate, and just prayed for the grief and the real circumstances within our community, within our nation. And so we prayed there. And then more of the psalm is read. And then look what happens when we get to the boldface. What does the prayer do? It opens us up to the possibility that at least some of us are the audience of the psalm. We come in prayer both as sinners and those sinned against. When we go through some of these psalms, especially these psalms that name real circumstances and real pain, and we squirm when the words don't feel authentic to us. And that makes sense. It's actually really good to squirm when the pain isn't our own. But that is not reason to drop the psalm and to not include it in worship. The fact that the psalm belongs to some of the community means that we have to sit with it. All right? And this may lead some to handing their fears, frustrations, anger, and vengeance over to God, take it to the Lord in prayer. For others, it may bring us to our knees and bring us to a confession, such as we have here. We suffer, but we also cause suffering. Too often, our lives are shaped by loneliness, abandonment. That is when the sin is against us. Or if this is confession, gossip, slander, and malice. So whether we're the recipient of that or the perpetrator of that, the psalm kind of, and the way that we're framing it with this prayer that's carefully worded, allows those who are in the congregation to identify either as audience or as the praying person in this psalm. All right? Psalms can lead us to confession. Let's look at a couple more examples of that. If you look at Psalm 15, that is 1:5. And this gets us back to, look at letter D as in God. 15D, that's page 74. Bringing home all the things we're talking about. How melody, this is a psalm that looks very much like a hymn. But also how this psalm can make us squirm too, because it asks the questions, who may be welcoming in the tent of the Lord? If you look at the psalm, you can turn back a page. Who are welcome? Those who lead a blameless life, who speak the truth, who do not slander. It's like, do we really want to say that we are the people who are welcome? Well, the melody itself, and you may or may not, class members, have any other text associations with that too. Does anybody? Which one?
Psalm 23.
Psalm 23. Exactly. And that's exactly what, for those who have an association with this tune, that's what the psalm we want them to be thinking about. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. So the question is, who may dwell within your house? And it ends, who do no wrong, who keep their word and seek no bribe or gain. All those who do such things shall live, and safe from harm remain. You can end the psalm right there, and you can just sit with it. Or you can say, where does this bring us? And you could go right on to 15, letter E, and say, we need to confess. We have strayed like sheep. We have turned each one of us to our own way. We pray for forgiveness for the times, and then you go through the psalm when we have not spoken the truth, when we have not loved our neighbor, when we have brought dishonor, and then shepherd us. So we want to dwell in the house of God. And then you start pointing to Psalm 23. In your goodness and mercy, lead us to dwell in your house, where we may rest securely forever. Amen. And then you have an option for going just to that last verse of Psalm 23. Your goodness and your steadfast love. So the framing of a prayer can really, really help. Turn back, and we looked at this as a class, I think last week. So it's a little review for you. But the framing of a refrain here, you've got two refrain possibilities for Psalm 15. One is, I'm going to live so God can use me anywhere, anytime. And that kind of helps us understand this psalm of integrity, of saying, I'm not there yet, but this is what I purpose to be as a follower of God. I'm going to live so God can use me. I'm going to try to be blameless. I'm going to work to tell the truth. I'm going to hold my tongue and not slander. And then there's another possible framing. If you look at the refrain of 15b, Lord, who shall be welcome in your tent? Who may dwell in your holy mountain? And the minor melody and the somberness of that refrain says, that maybe I haven't done all these things that I should have as a follower of God, or maybe other people haven't and I've been hurt because of it. All right? So framing can be really powerful. Go back one more psalm. Let's look at 14. Letter B. And we have that same melody we had just before, a slightly different text, a different chanting melody. But here's a psalm, and I grew up with the Psalter hymnal, and I bet lots of people, if you're in the Christian Reformed Church and you remember the old blue Psalter hymnal or the gray Psalter hymnal, Psalm 14 was always presented just like a hymn. And the problem with that is, to sing a song and say, fools say in their heart there is no God. If you sing it like a hymn, it can only be your words, all right? Because you're giving assent to these words. The power of the refrain and backing away from it a little bit and just giving the congregation a window into the psalm and having the more difficult words spoken or chanted by either an ensemble or a leader allows for people to kind of wrestle with the psalm. And the refrain suggests how they might do that. So here the refrain is, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. If you turn back, there's another refrain that you could sing, oh, that your salvation and your rescue would swiftly come to redeem your people. That's another possibility. So the choice of the refrain might even say, like, as with the Apostle Paul, all have sinned. And when you get to verse 2, the Lord looks down upon us all to see if there's anyone who is wise, anyone who seeks after God. All have proved faithless, all have turned bad. There is none who do good, no, not one. And that should sound very familiar. If you don't know from Psalm 14, you know it from the Apostle Paul in Romans. And you'll see that on the facing page. So this psalm becomes a psalm that can lead us, one possibility, to confession. So you have a prayer of confession, assurance of pardon. And the assurance of pardon lifts verses right from Romans and quotes the psalm back. So the prayers that we kind of follow up our psalms with or lead into our psalms with can really help the congregation into these more unfamiliar psalm landscapes. Look at page 65. Here you have the NRSV, kind of faithful, rather conservative, literal translation of Psalm 14. And what you have in Psalms for All Seasons at the bottom of each of these are some helps for worship leadership. One is a prayer, and that's what I want to look at in just a little bit. But you also notice that there are very brief footnotes about the psalm, and not just footnotes about the psalm in general, but with an eye toward worship leaders as to how you might kind of look at the psalm in pieces, how you might break up the psalm, and then in italic script, some ideas of how this psalm might actually be used in worship. But I sort of want to focus on prayer here. If you put your finger on page 65, and then also look at, I'm going to look, page 350. This is a really interesting psalm in that this psalm appears twice in the book of Psalms, almost word for word. There's only a couple words different, and that is the name for God. The name for God in Psalm 14 is the Yahweh, and it comes from that tradition. And for Psalm 53, it's God. It's another name. But otherwise, these psalms are the same. So what we wanted to do, and I encourage you, if you have Psalms for All Seasons, to pay close attention to the introduction to the book, because it talks about how prayer functions intersecting with psalms. A lot of times in a lot of traditions, we just want to conclude the psalm with a Trinitarian either restatement of the psalm or a blessing. But we want these prayers to actually show different ways of, through prayer, faithfully engaging the psalm. And since this psalm appears twice, you can see slightly different ways of engaging the psalm. At page 65, Psalm 14, patient and loving Lord, in a world where many deny your very existence and fearlessly break your laws, we trust that you are God Most High. And it goes on in that vein. That is to say, we are taking the voice of the psalm here and saying, there are fools out there, and these fools have power, and they eat up people like bread, and we're praying for God to do something about it, just as the psalmist does. Slightly different in Psalm 53, the soundtrack is a little bit different. Patient and loving God, so often we live as though we were God. And that is to say, this psalm, we might be the audience of the psalm. So that is not to say that one way of praying after psalm is right. Is to say, be careful in your selection of a prayer or your writing of a prayer, to say, how do you want your congregation to engage this particular psalm? All right. Listening for the voice of others. We already engaged this a little bit with Psalm 140. Deliver me from evil. Just by that tune, kind of hearing the voice of Christ. But we also want to hear the voice of others in the world. And I see we're coming up. I'm going to try and hold this to about 6 more minutes. We might just look at some examples and see if there are questions. And if there are not, we're just going to keep singing. Psalm 79 is a psalm that we do not engage very much. If you look at page 487, there you have it. It's a psalm about trauma in the community. And for most worshiping communities in North America, you probably did not experience as a community this sort of trauma in the past week. So who's the psalm about, and whose voice, if it doesn't engage you, does that mean you don't engage the psalm? But if you turn the page, those first 2 words in this refrain say it all. Someone's crying. Someone's crying. And what that suggests is that the psalm might not be about you. It might not even be about your community. It might be about the Jews thousands of years ago who were conquered by the Babylonians, from whence this psalm probably originated. Or it could be the Jews of today, or just this last century, who are still haunted by the Holocaust. This is one of what is referred to as Holocaust psalms. Or it could be a psalm for Egyptian Christians today who are traumatized every time they walk into a church and they feel like they're a target. And they're already talking about, will they dare to go to church on April 1, the high holy day of Easter, when they feel so traumatized by the possibility of experience exactly what we find in this psalm. Someone is crying, and it could actually be somebody sitting in the pew right next to you. The point is, someone's crying. And that is the claim of the refrain, and it enables the psalm to lay claim on us, even if we're not the ones who are doing the crying right now. It was the psalm that my dad tells me they sang in his church in Kononijk in the Netherlands growing up. They would sing it in the evening. And there was a sizable Jewish population, and suddenly they were all gone. Under Nazi occupation, they were all taken away. And this is the psalm they sang many Sunday evenings. Just such frustration and anger. And in the church that I serve, a little Presbyterian church right outside of Princeton, we have sung this psalm on the Remembrance Day of the Holocaust Remembrance Day, when the Jewish synagogue down the road sends some people to just help us remember. Their purpose is to remember, to not forget the Holocaust. And this is the psalm that we read and sang together with them under their leadership. So it's a way of hearing other voices. It's a refrain that can help us to open our hearts. And I will say, look at 102B. We don't have time to sing these. I just want to point this out, particularly for those who are coming in on the webinar. And I told Diane I would say this. I know there's a Reformed Worship article that Diane can link up to this webinar, from which we pulled out this litany. It was Len Vanderzee wrote the article, and he used Psalm 102 as a hospice psalm. And we heard lamented on the steps of the chapel outside today with our community that there's so much sentiment of our prayers and thoughts are with you. Our prayers and thoughts are with you. And we certainly pray for members of our congregation who are dying. But it's another thing to hear the voice of somebody who's dying. And that's what Psalm 102 is. And I encourage you, when we get that link to that Reformed Worship article, to look at it. The other thing I would point out to you, too, a lot of the information of that article is in the performance notes. I just, for those of you who use this book, if you look at the back at page 1088, yes, 1088, and there, you should be able to find this, the first edition of the Psalter, the page numbers were slightly different, so if you don't see it at 1088, you'll find it somewhere. But you'll see performance notes for 102B, and that goes for many of the psalms that we felt warranted some sort of introduction as to how might I actually use this in the community. And I won't read it all there, but the performance notes for 102B are pretty extensive in saying exactly how you might use this in worship and how you might use this at the bedside of somebody who's in hospice care, as pastoral care in worship and at the bedside and with the family of somebody who's dying. I think I'm going to skip over a few. I do want to mention before we kind of open this up for questions, I'll just take a couple more minutes. The Psalms in conjunction with preaching, because I know many of you are preachers, many people here, probably all of you will preach sermons sometimes, but how Psalms can be engaged in preaching. And for those of you who are musicians, you should always be engaged with preaching as well, and thinking about how the music we select, the songs we sing, the psalms we pray, are reflecting in some way of the preached word. Psalm 88, I want to look at that, and the members of the class had an assignment to work on this, and so this would be familiar to them. But Psalm 88 is a psalm of deep, dark despair. If you look at page 538, 88a, here's some of the verses of Psalm 88 taken from Eugene Peterson's The Message. And the first time I encountered this psalm in worship and sung this way, with the choir and the congregation kind of pushing back against the psalm a little bit with the words of 539, within our darkest night you kindle the fire that never dies away. But the prayer keeps going back to, God, you're my last chance of the day. And the intensity of these emotions of my own, you've dumped me in despair, God. And kind of some finger pointing at God, you're all powerful, why am I in this situation? My only friend left is darkness. And then the preaching, the next word we heard after this was, and there were 10 lepers. And immediately we understood that the psalm was helping us to understand the depths of despair of those who had leprosy and those who cried out to Jesus with the words of the psalm. And so the psalm can help you do some character development. Psalm 13, we don't even have to turn to it now, but we had one of our preachers here at the seminary preach on Moses, the mother of Moses, her act of putting Moses into the Nile River. And just to think of what faith, but also what trauma was endured by that mother of Moses. And this preacher he broke in the middle of the sermon, and he had us sing Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, how long will the enemy triumph over me? How long do I have to live with this sort of despair? And then that kind of hope at the end, I will yet praise you. I will, not today, but at some point, I will yet again praise you. And then I would say, if we have time, I'd like to do Psalm 56, a psalm of the blues. Psalm 13 is a psalm of the blues. 13D, I think it is one that we could sing. But this morning, when we were all standing outside, and then the president of our institution addresses, were some of you there? He didn't give a sermon. There wasn't time for a sermon, but that whole act, the Association of Black Seminarians sponsored this. It happened so quickly. It was yesterday we knew this was happening, and that this was going to be a time for the community to stop and pray and listen to these names. And before he gave the blessing, he said, the lectionary psalm for today is Psalm 5. And if we look at Psalm 5, it's not preaching, but the context of that sort of gathering we had together gave such context, and we wouldn't otherwise jump to Psalm 5, but when we heard Psalm 5 read today, there were amens, there were tears, there were groans and moans, because now we understand what it means. Listen to the sound of my cry, my King and my God. For to you I pray. In the morning, hear my voice. And I won't take the time to go through it now, but look at Psalm 5. Diane, unless you interrupt me, I am going to ask that we look at 5C. And I'm going to play this on the piano very lightly, because part of what Greg Shear has done with this is demonstrated how we can take a psalm. The congregation can create a refrain around it, but what Greg has done is he's actually created a vamp so that there's some musical material, and if there's some narration that happens, and I'm going to assign it to some of you right now, and there's some suggestions of exactly how you should read this, and I think that's important. Narrator 1 with a hint of disdain, narrator 2 more peacefully. Yeti, would you mind taking one of these voices? You'll take voice 1, and I'm taking the two of you, Steve, if you take narrator 2, because you're closest to the microphone, and maybe just project your voice that way a little bit, and you use a big voice. And Diane, stop me if the piano really gets in the way. I'm going to keep it pretty soft, but it'll give you an idea. Maybe we'll just go through the first half, and you can imagine the second half. And hopefully class members, you can just pick this up so we don't get into trouble. Hear the sound of my sigh. Hear my breath. Hear the sound of my cry. I often wonder if you just
For you are not a God who is pleased with wickedness. With you, evil people are not welcome. The arrogant cannot stand in your presence. You hate all who do wrong. You destroy those who tell lies. The bloodthirsty and deceitful you, Lord, detest.
But I, by your great love, come into your house. In reverence, I bow down toward your holy temple. Lead me, Lord, in your righteousness, because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me. Hear the song of sighing. Hear my prayer, my God. Hear the sound of sighing. My offer up, I fear and trust to your unending care. If you look ahead at the text that we did not sing, you can see, and just imagine our community today, that Psalm 5, in the context of deep lament, and sort of the message of the leadership that day was getting beyond the sentiment of our prayers and thoughts are with you, to hear the cries and the sighs in the more searing language of those who are traumatized. So that we, through this music and through this refrain, are more fully engaged with our own voices, our own souls, our own weariness, and if not that, somebody's, because somebody's crying. Diane, I'm going to stop there because there's very little time left. I could do more, but I just want to see if there's anything that we need to address.
No, thank you, Martin. That was great. We do have a question. We have a question from Chad. If anybody else has a question who's out there on the webinar, please send them in soon. But we'll address the question from Chad first. So Chad is asking, in what part of a worship service do you think it would work well to use a responsorial psalm?
I think it could work just about anywhere, and I'm just trying to think about my own church and where we use them. A lot of times we open worship with them. Instead of just using, for Presbyterians, it's very typical to have a call to worship that's a responsive psalm, and to just throw in a refrain there to engage that psalm in a different way. I'd say one of the most powerful ways to use them would be bumping up against the sermon. Particularly if you want to, in some way, give some character development to the narrative. And I'm going to return to that in just a little bit. I gave a testimony of somebody who, smack in the middle of a sermon, it wasn't a responsorial psalm, but dropped a psalm in there. But another wonderful place to use a responsorial psalm is the time of prayer. I'm just trying to think. 56. But yeah, 56 is where I want to turn to right now. Oh, it's 55, though. I wanted to suggest, if you look at 55, letter A, again, sorry, this is not a responsorial psalm, but it gives an idea of how a psalm could be used in connection with prayer. At 55A, it has the sort of like we had with one of the psalms we were just looking at, I think it was 41. A lot of these psalms of despair begin with an address that gets us ready for that kind of testimony prayer, and then at the end, sort of an assurance that God's going to hear the prayer. So something like 55A could kind of frame a prayer. I need your help, O Lord my God. Do not ignore my plea, for I am restless and distraught. Oh, hear and answer me. If I had wings, I'd fly away into the wilderness to find a quiet, sheltered place where I can be at rest. Stop. Pray. And this can be done with a responsorial psalm. And the psalm could be the prayer, as we sort of experience. And then when the prayers are all done, long as I live in troubles rise, my God, on you I'll call, for example. I think those are the most natural places for responsive psalm singing. I think psalm singing, otherwise, can and should happen anywhere. And this is not a problem so much for those in the Reformed tradition. It actually should come naturally because we used to sing only psalms, and so we knew how to open with psalms, to confess with the psalm, to pray with the psalm, to praise and to go out with the psalm. For those in the liturgical traditions, I've got an Episcopalian right here. The problem is Psalms often get kind of straitjacketed into they only fit between the Old Testament and the New Testament lesson. And so I'm always encouraging people to break out of any boxes that we put the Psalm in. Is there another question? Otherwise, I want to say something about Psalm 56. But
Okay, hold that thought. We just have, I want to read this from Stanley. He says, it's not a question, but appreciation for the insight that even if I'm not feeling the pain in a particular psalm, I can still read or sing it in solidarity with others in the community who are experiencing pain, helping me identify with and understand those in pain. Thank you for that.
yes. Okay, great. Can I use that as a segue to maybe what will be our closing song?
Yes.
Okay. So if you flip to the next psalm, Psalm 56, a beautiful psalm expressive of pain. It's to me, it's like the quintessential blues psalm, partly because it has that beautiful verse 8. Oh, where are my glasses? Here we go. You have kept count of my tossings, put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your record? Then so it's this sense of God holds on to our tears and our laments. And that's a good reason to be honest in our prayers and to weep when we're struck down. And so if you look at 56b, this is a Ken Medema song, and he actually wrote this for this psalm project. And when we were doing part of the problem with some of these psalms is we call them gear shifting psalms. They don't stay in one vein. They go from kind of lament to adulation to trust, but then they go back to lament again. And this is one of these psalms. And I was thinking about character development as I was getting ready for this. And for a sermon, and it made me think of, this psalm made me think of like Esther. God, I am beaten, battered, and bruised, slandered and stepped on, hurt and abused. And the way to expose young people to psalms, and this is a psalm that you can use to do that, is to say, and it's not just Esther, it's Mordecai too. You know, there are these characters that we preach on that go through such intense suffering. What I want is for young people to have, and all people, but particularly young people, because we shield them so much from tools to deal with pain, and they're the ones who if you're going to say who feels beaten, battered, and bruised, the way young people treat each other sometimes, they can really get into this. Do I want to tell my daughter this is a song I want you to learn? Because I think, Sarah, you know, God, I'm beaten, battered, and bruised. But no, if you tell young people, we're going to be preaching on Mordecai or Esther, and we're going to read it, and then we want the youth choir or the youth ensemble or the praise team to sing this. They will internalize it because they're thinking about how they're leading in worship and how they are giving voice to Esther or Mordecai, but they are going to be won over by the melody and the strength of the text, and they're going to have this when they need it. We've got 4 minutes, and let's do a little bit. Class, you all have we sung this?
Martin?
Yes.
Martin, can I ask you to do it without the piano? Sorry, it totally cuts out the voices when you get the piano. And I know I love the accompaniment, but
All right, so you got the blues going. You got to use your imagination. And if somebody doesn't want to sing this song, here we go. Let's sing verse 1 and go. God, I am beaten, battered and bruised, slandered and stepped on, hurt and abused, but I trust in you, and I am not afraid. Let them do what they will, I trust in you. We're going to see verse 2 and go. God, there are times when I wish you would fight. Take on my fight, so they'll know I am right. But you hold my tears, and you know what they will,
I'll trust in you.
God, I am promised to you. God, now my offering I give. Here is my heart, my soul, my all. Now in your light I will live. We'll stop there because we need to. But you'll notice that this kind of vamp kind of keeps pulling you back into the blues, and you have another verse about the bad stuff, but it then goes back to now in your life I will live. And I think for young people, that would be a fabulous song for them to have in their hip pocket.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you. You guys sound great. Thank you all for coming today and for participating. Thank you, Martin, especially. I am going to share, I think, my screen. Did you have anything you wanted to say in closing, Martin?
No, I think this is a good way to end. There's no good way to end. But
I know.
But to say now in your life I will live, which would be okay.
That's good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and a special thanks to all of you. I'm going to share my screen because, well, I think I have up a PowerPoint that has some information on here for you. And so if you can see that, our website is crcna.org/worship. That's where you'll find this recording. You can email us if you have any questions on the Psalms. We'll pass them on to Martin, the questions, if you would like him to answer more questions that you've thought of as you've gone. And then there's information there on Psalms for All Seasons. Again, if you don't have the Psalter, it's available from Faith Alive, and it really is a special book. And so I know Martin's been very involved in that, and there's so much more he could teach. I'm sure you could go on for like another week or so, right, Martin?
Oh, thanks, help me.
At least. Okay, good. But thank you all for joining. We are thrilled that you've been here, and we hope you'll join us for another webinar in the future. At this point, I will close the meeting and say goodbye to all of you, and thanks for coming.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.